Hi friends, Crystal here from Homemaking on the Homestead, and welcome to my channel. Today I'm going to talk about prepping, pantry planning, good stewardship, and most of all, not living in fear. Alright, so let's look at all these different topics. Prepping seems to be this big buzzword today, and so many people are even more so getting into prepping. It is understandable with the way that our world is going today. There's so much uncertainty. Things are in a lot of chaos. Prices are rising. People are seeing empty shelves at the grocery store. There's a lot of things to cause people to be very concerned. And I can totally understand that, and I do agree with that. I think it's always been a good idea to have, of course, a well-stocked pantry. But what does that mean, to have a well-stocked pantry? And let's dissect prepping. Is this something that we should be concerned about? Should we be prepping? Is it the right thing to do? Should we just trust God? And most of all, I think I wanted to talk a little bit about not living in fear. So the first thing I'm going to talk about is, should we be prepping? Is that something as Christians that we should do? Should we prep, or should we just trust God that He is going to provide for us if something terrible goes wrong? And I think it's good to look in the Bible. We see examples of both. But the main example that comes to my mind right away is Noah. He had to prep for what God had told him was coming, the flood, and God required him to build the big boat. He required him to get food into it for not just him, his wife and family, but also for all the animals that were going to be there. That he had to do a lot of major prepping. So I think that is an example that says that, yeah, God doesn't have a problem with us prepping. Another example that comes to my mind is Joseph, knowing through the dream that Pharaoh had that there was going to be 7 years of famine, and he wanted to bring in all the grain that he could, twice as much as what he normally would, so that they would be able to eat during the 7 years of famine that was coming up. I think it's just a natural thing to want to prepare for the things that we do not know in the future. I'm sure as I'm talking to you all, we all carry health insurance. Most of us all will carry health insurance because we don't know the future. And we know that if something was to happen, then having the health insurance is very vital and important. We are prepping for what might happen in the future. There's a lot of financial planners out there who talk about financially planning for the future. They recommend, I don't know what it is actually, 3 months, 6 months worth of savings in your account, in your bank account, so that if difficult times come, you have financial resources to carry you through those times. And we know from the Proverbs 31 woman that she provided clothes for her family through the winter so that they would be warm. She was preparing ahead of time. She would buy her food from afar. And that was preparing to have a full cupboard so that she could feed her family. Proverbs also talks about the ant. Go to the ant, you sluggard, I think is what the verse says. Look at their way, having no chief or master over them. They do what they need to do. They prepare for the winter. They store away food. In the New Testament, when Jesus fed the 5,000, they did not prepare for that, but that was Jesus's moment to shine and to perform his miracles to feed the 5,000. And I think that in both cases, whether we prep or we don't, or we're not able to, something happens unexpectedly, and we're not able to prepare for something, I think in both instances we are trusting God. So when it comes to preparing and prepping our pantry, what is enough? How should we do it? I think that those are both things that you have to ask yourself based on your own individual needs. I think the number one thing, though, is that as we are preparing a pantry, if you have never, thought about it, or your pantry stock is fairly small, You could be dealing with a lot of fear right now. There is so much out there. You just start searching prepping, put that into a search engine, put it into YouTube, and it's like the doomsday things that start coming up are huge. And the, prep now, you've got to do this now, get that food now. It's so much so, we were in Costco the other day, and I saw these prepping, dried, freeze-dried food kits that you can buy. I think a lot of these things, I'm not saying they're bad, they're pretty expensive, but I think a lot of these things are playing on people's fears. And I think that we always need to have that faith in God and that trust in God. And then we need to work within our resources. And that's where the stewardship part comes in. God has provided us with the resources that we have. And what is the best way to deal with it? Not everybody can go out and spend a few $100s on these kits of food just to put them away for the next 25 years just in case you might need it. So, work with what you have and realize that what you have is going to be enough because that's what God has given you. And use it wisely. Buy those extra items that you normally would eat and put them on the shelf. I mean, if you can buy when you go into the store every shopping trip an extra case of canned vegetables or canned beans or something like that, I think you're doing great. You have a supply of rice and oats and flour and baking items so that you can cook and create something if it was to be necessary. Also, the other thing about those foods is they are foods that you're going to eat anyway. So unlike spending a whole lot of money on freeze-dried prepared meals that you may never touch because they're there for someday, at least the food that you're buying as you prep your own pantry is going to be food that you know that you will consume. We need to take them seriously, but not out of fear, but out of good stewardship. We need to do that as part of being a homemaker, as part of caring for our home, as part of home management, is to make sure that we are prepared in the event that something was to happen. And anything can happen, to take your preparedness and make it something that it wasn't. Your house could get flooded, your garden could be overrun by bugs, and things not turn out the way that you had planned. But I think that is where the faith and that is where the trust comes from, that God will provide. But we have to make those efforts to do something about it. I think some of the things that we learned from 2020, the year 2020, is that aside from making sure we have a well-stocked pantry, is just watching the fear that overtook the country and the hoarding that began of items, the amassing huge amounts of toilet paper, and where stores like Costco had to have limits of how many bags of rice you could have and how much food could you have, because people were literally panicked because they didn't know what was going to happen and they were living in fear. And I think that needs to be avoided at all costs. I don't think that we need to be running out in a state of panic and filling up our storage areas with all the food that we possibly can. I think we need to be using our money wisely and preparing for it in a wise and organized fashion. I also think it's good to remember that our country has been through difficult times in the past where they didn't know what the future was going to look like, which is very similar to where we are right now. One of the hard times that I can think of in the somewhat recent past is the Great Depression. I remember my grandmother in her basement. She had hundreds of coffee cans. She saved every coffee can. In those coffee cans was every rubber band, every paper clip, every little tiny thing that she thought might be needed at some point. She was she saved everything, and that was because she had to go through the Great Depression, and she had to deal with some very difficult times. And it makes you think different. And I think that that's what's happening now to a lot of people, is we are beginning to think different, especially if having a good, well-stocked pantry and having your finances prepared and those types of things have not been something that's been, on your mind or a priority for you. And I just wanted to show you this this book. I have been reading this book just here and there. We Had Everything But Money. This is the sweetest book, I think, an encouraging book that I have read in a long time. It's not a very big book. I'm pretty sure your library has it, so I'm not trying to promote you run out and buy it, because once you read it, it's, you know, it's not like a resource book where you're going to go back to it again and again. But what they have in it is stories, and stories in different categories, and they're personal accounts of people that lived through the Depression and what they had to do in order to survive, in order to make it, the foods they ate. They're sweet stories of how people band together, pulled together, and the things that they did in order to survive difficult times. And if nothing else, I'm not saying that these ideas are things that you can go out and do, you know, in difficult times. What I'm saying is that people have survived difficult times, and we will too. We will get through this. We will get on the other side of this. So in conclusion, I do believe that we should be prepping. We should be setting aside things. We should be having our pantries full. We should be making sure that we're in a good position should things get difficult, whether that's for us as a country, for us as individuals, or for any type of reason. There are always things that can happen. Natural disasters, they can be difficult times for anyone, a job loss. So being prepared is very important. And knowing that you have food to feed your family should something difficult happen, whether it's on a huge scale, nationwide, or individual things that can happen to us. And I think we should do that out of good stewardship of what God has provided us, and definitely not out of fear. Nobody knows the future but the Lord, and it's our job to be prepared to the best of our abilities, using what God has provided and what we have already in our hands. All right, you guys, thank you for watching my video, and I will see you all in my next video. Bye-bye.